Hello students, how are you all? So, are you ready to start the chapter 5th of our history, which is Crafts and Industries under Colonialism? In this chapter, you will study about crafts and industries before Britishers' arrival, Indian trade in the 18th century, decline of Indian handicrafts, Industrial Revolution, policy of one-way trade, deurbanization, new types of industries in India, impact of colonial policy. Crafts and industries before the Britishers' arrival. India had excellent agricultural outcome and flourishing crafts and industries. Villages in India had self-sufficient economy. Each village was an independent producing unit in every field. Agriculture and crafts and industries such as weaving, carpentry, pottery, gold and iron smithery, etc. The products were not only sold in the local market but in other parts of the country and world also. Traders from all around the world, especially from Arab and European regions, came to India to buy Indian products such as spices, cotton and silk textiles and other materials. They paid the local traders well, bringing them a good profit on their products. These traders sold these products in the markets of European and American countries. This brought these traders good profit. The later Mughals also encouraged the foreign traders come and buy Indian products. Indian trade in the 18th century. The Indian trade with the European traders in the 17th century was in favor of the Indian peasants and craftsmen as they exported large quantities of fine cotton and silk fabrics, spices, indigo, sugar, drug, precious stones and various works of craftsmanship. In exchange, India received gold and silver. Just as the British established their rule, the whole setup of Indian society and economy started changing. The East India Company made new rules and policies. The Indian goods now were not sold in the European markets. Instead, they started buying raw materials from India, manufactured goods from them in England, and sold finished goods in India. The sale of Indian handicraft declined and the Britishers were responsible for their ruin. Decline of Indian handicrafts. The East India Company got the Diwani rights of Bengal. According to these rights, the company was granted tax-free trade inside the country. For this reason, the company got surplus from Diwani revenue. This was used by the company to finance its investment in India. The producers of goods were forced to supply their produce to the company at low prices fixed by their officials. Great demands of Indian textile in England was a matter of concern for British cloth manufacturers. They put pressure on the British government to ban the import of Indian textiles. So in 1720, the government in Britain passed the Calico Act, which banned the import of printed cotton cloth into England. The Indian clothes that reached England were more expensive than the locally produced clothes. The demand for Indian clothes decreased and the textile and other industries suffered in India. Industrial Revolution. After the Industrial Revolution, clothes began to be made on the machines. This was cheaper than the cloth made by the hand. The Indian craftsmen who made clothes by hand had to compete with the machine-made cheap clothes of Britain. Indian textiles also lost out to British textiles on the issue of prices in the European and American market. The conquest of Bengal and then the other states of India opened up a vast market for manufactured textiles from Britain. The Industrial Revolution was already in full swing and Britain began to dump its finished textiles in India. India, once the world's leading exporter, was now forced to become an importer. This is the image of village craftsmen and artisans during British India. Policy of one-way trade. The British began to follow the policy of one-way free trade. This meant that British textile coming into India did not pay any duty, while Indian textiles sent to England had to pay heavy duties. The British captured one Indian territory after another. The Indian rulers, nobles, landlords and others who patronized the craftsmen lost their power. As a result, the Indian goods were short in demand. This loss of patronage was a severe blow, particularly to those weavers who produced expensive textiles like brocades. Many weavers and spinners became jobless. Deurbanization. With the decline of textile industry, there was a large-scale deurbanization. The main centers of the textile industry in the late 18th century, such as Murshidabad and Dhaka in the east, but Patan, Ahmedabad and Surat in the west, Lucknow, Jaipur and Banaras in the north, Petaboli, Masulipatam and Madras in the south were deserted. Increased pressure on land. The changes resulted in the increased pressure on agriculture. Weavers and spinners were left jobless and become agricultural laborers. They did not possess any other skill. They could not get absorbed in factories. There was large-scale underemployment in agriculture. This is the image of Dadabhai Naoroji. Dadabhai Naoroji was the first to acknowledge that the poverty was due to British exploitation of India's wealth to Britain. The drain theory was an indication of the nationalist leaders' comprehensive understanding of the colonial situation. Through drain theory, the exploitative character of the British rule was exposed. New type of industries in India. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was a great impact of nationalist movement. During the late 19th century, the industries that came up included either plantation or machine industry. Plantation industry. Tea introduced in the 19th century went on to become the biggest plantation industry within a short span of time. The tea gardens located in Assam, Bengal and South India steadily increased their production, and by the early years of 20th century, India became a leading producer of tea in the world. Coffee, chinkona and rubber were the other items of the plantation industry. Machine-based industry. It began in the second half of the 19th century. Of these, the most important ones was the cotton and jute industry. India became fourth in the leading textile producers in the world just before the First World War. Cotton mills were mostly set up at Ahmedabad, Bombay and Madras. The first cotton mill was set up in 1853 in Bombay. They produced cotton yarn for the cottage industry of India, despite stiff competition from England and Japan. The Swadeshi movement gave an encouragement to indigenous products and helped in the growth of cotton industry. Indian cotton industry continued to develop. Mahatma Gandhi encouraged the use of spinning wheel and the cloth spun out of it was khadi. Heavy industries. The modern industries included iron and steel, cement, chemical and power, which are also required for other industries. Coal at this time remained the biggest source of power. With the growth of industries and the expansion of railways, the demand for coal kept on increasing. It was also required in the iron smelting process, which began in 1874. This is the image of iron and steel plant, Jamshedpur. Iron and steel. The iron and steel industry started developing around the early 20th century. The Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO, was set up at Sakchi, now Jamshedpur, by Jamshedji Tata in 1911. By 1912, it became fully operational. Soon, many iron and steel factories were set up in Bengal and Mysore. The development of iron and steel industry helped the growth of engineering industries. Impact of colonial policies. The British followed economic policies that did not serve the Indian interest and made deliberate attempts to keep Indian industries in a subordinate position. The changes that occurred in the crafts and industries under the British rule played a vital role in the rise of nationalism in the 19th century and 20th century. Dadabhai Naoroji wrote in his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India that throughout the British rule, there was a continuous drain of wealth from India to Great Britain. This drain of wealth took many forms, one of them being the profit earned by the British-owned industries in India. There was continuous opposition to India's drain of wealth and the failure of the British government in developing Indian resources and protecting its indigenous industries. Mahatma Gandhi in particular asked the people to boycott British clothes and use hand-woven cloth instead. This was an attempt to revive the dying textile industry in India. During the national movement also, the British were forced to give some protection to Indian industries. When India got its freedom, industrial development was the topmost priority for the government. Summing up, in the pre-British days, India had a flourishing rural economy. Among other things, India was famous for the fine quality of its cotton and silk textiles in the world. Trade with the European nations in the 17th century was heavily balanced in favor of India. The conquest of Bengal and eventually the whole of India opened up a vast market for manufactured textiles from Britain. The modern industries included iron and steel, cement, chemical and power, which are also required for other industries. Thank you, class. Let's meet in the next chapter.